Hello and welcome to the Hacking State podcast. This is your host, Alex Mershak. With me today is my good friend, Thom Ivy. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Alex. Very happy to be here.
Thank you for coming on. So I wanted to reach out to you because you're a very interesting guy. You've explored a lot of different topics. You're um, involved in tech, but you're also quite intellectual and also a little esoteric. And, I just wanted to sort of get your perspective on a number of things. Here at Hacking State, our interest is in political technology. And it seems to me like most of the things that you are broadly interested, not only in on the technological side of things, but also other areas such as pheromones and even aspects of personal biological optimization, whether that's
hmm
bioenergetics or something like, peating. These are all areas that touch on kind of the main theme of Hacking State, which is sort of this fractal image of political technology as
hmm
sprouting up from the individual and then broadening out all the way up into larger social structures. Um, and so I thought it would be good this time of year. It's we're getting close to the holidays, so why not do a quick interview with a friend and see what they're up to. So Tom, what have you been working on lately?
Man, it's been an interesting year and all those things. Like it's clear that we've been friends for some time now since you moved to Austin. And so when you kind of like lay out all of the details, it's like, yep, 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 yep. Like I see why, we get along so well, especially in person, and why we never seem to run out of things to have a good conversation about. And I like anytime someone's the term like fractal, I'm always like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's like if I give myself one word to like be like an online rationalist about where I don't mind the kind of like highfalutin language that people tend to use, it's on fractal because I do think that the structure of reality effectively and efficiently flows that way.
Hmm.
Um, so it's a nice way, I think, to look at a lot of different problems and to try to find things that work with nature as opposed to against it. And a lot of my work over the past year has been thinking along those lines, how to work with nature and not against it. And so a couple of those things were, as you mentioned, pheromones. What are dimensions of the human five senses that we've been ignoring or could optimize for vastly better return on investment? And I think sense of smell is huge, even if you're not like committed to the idea that humans are propelled forward in a certain direction all the time by a compound emitted by our armpits or whatever. I think we don't give serious enough attention to just the olfactory sense.
Hmm.
In fact, I think Zoomers and Jeremy Fragrance have done much more for kind of like sense of consciousness around this stuff than we've probably done in the past 100 years. Um, so I'm actually super excited about that. So the pheromone thing is how do we use this sense for autotherapeutics is what I'm primarily interested in, partly for regulatory reasons, and partly for just a place to kind of get the conversation going, so that people become more comfortable with how these tools can be used for themselves. So the first two I've kind of targeted, and I've been working on this for over 10 years now. The first one is, uh, well, I'm going to swap them actually. Um, the first one is a social anxiety improving kind of like, so I'll call it a support compound because we obviously can't say anything specific about its specs, but it seems to make people a lot more comfortable being around others.
Hmm.
And that sense is very embodied. It's not like, oh, I'm not having those thoughts. It's like my entire body feels more alive, more in tune, more accessible in the vibration that's happening between people. And so that I'm really excited about. When we started this project, which was originally called Pharos, now it's called BioQ, and I've worked with two other people on this over the course of the past 10 years. Um, we were much more excited about an ADHD support compound that we called Focus. And so this is actually, and I'll just give away all my secrets here, is made from phenethylamine. And how this kind of compound got noticed, uh, there's the theoretical side and the experimental side, and the experimental side is from Harvard's chemosensory lab. And what they found is like this compound is excreted in the urine of meat-eating predators.
Hmm.
And when humans smell it in this really tight kind of like microgram range, any more and it gets filtered out as like environmental noise. Any less and it's not seen as significant. So they're actually the range of like signal here is really, really tight. Um, and they figured out that people were vigilant, awake, kind of like primed to do something. And what we think is that this is an evolutionary instinct that helps protect us from meat-eating predators. So we're ready. We're like oh shit, something, there's something around us, and I better be awake, vigilant, and motivated and ready to run potentially. So the product actually recontextualizes those effects. And so this is like one of hundreds of these putative human pheromones that we could be combining, synergizing, and a lot of the effects in combination are not intuitive. For instance, I think we've talked about this before, like the sensation of respect, if you want to get that pheromonally, tends to come from a combination of safety and fear and like admiration, kind of
Hmm.
like subcomponents. So it's like I think a lot of people that when I think about respecting in my life, it's like, oh, they could hurt me, but they don't. And I
Yeah.
like that. So pheromonally, I think it kind of comports. It's like, oh, there's something that I admire about this person, something that I fear about this person, and I'm also at ease, which is an interesting combo.
I would wonder what that looks like from the hormonal level of the person who would be, secreting such a thing, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's extremely contextual, but it might also just be as simple as like someone in the case of males who's like very high in testosterone and maybe
Mhm.
uh you know some number of other things that have to do with like their the steadiness of their nervous system or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, the vagal tone,
Mhm.
Pete's focus on cortisol here. Like you can not only see a stressed out man, but you can smell him.
Yeah.
And this is why we have these dogs that are trained to like run through the woods and find, prison escapees, or criminal, whatever, because it's pretty easy to smell. I had a friend who in college said that he could tell I was stressed. I was like, interesting ability. Um, and I've heard men make many claims about maybe detecting what phase of the moon women are in
Yeah, I've
sometimes
heard
too.
that one. I've heard that one too.
Yeah. So yeah, I definitely think all these things are kind of connected. It's like you typically would want, a guy whose cortisol's low, whose testosterone's high. That's the kind of like golden male lion vibe. People talk about how, roid rage and whatever, and that I think has been a horrible misunderstanding of the endocrinology because it seems like, from my experience and what I've heard from others, um, the higher your testosterone is, you're not like aggressive. You're actually
No.
pretty chilled out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is a common misunderstanding that
Mhm.
aggression is caused by testosterone. It's
Yeah.
actually quite the opposite. Usually, men that are more stressed out and producing stress hormones, very estrogenic type of body type, are the ones who are likely to be more aggressive. So
Yeah.
the like vision of kind of like the dominant leader in like a very primal sense is someone that's actually has no reason to be very aggressive,
Yeah.
like at all. And so they're only going to be selectively aggressive in cases where it's absolutely demanded, because most of
Mhm.
the time, the male leaders are more selected for keeping the peace than they're selected for, um, you know, wanton violence per se.
Yeah. Yeah. The kind of social intelligence theory of like the alpha in
Hmm.
in the human versus like the older primate system, it seemed like where a lot more dominance hierarchies are fueled through violence and less so through like prestige, like you see with humans more often.
So I want to ask you a little bit about like I guess while we're on the topic of olfactory like effects. I don't know what the terminology you have around this is. It sounds like it's still somewhat experimental. It sounds like
Definitely.
you were moving originally more in like the nootropic direction, and now you have this
Mhm.
concept of autotherapeutics. Um, and I think I'll just say I think it's worth noting that yeah, most of us do overlook the olfactory component of, like we have this whole one of our five senses and no one's paying attention to it, right?
Mhm.
And very little as far as like technological applications have been done in terms of like using it, exploiting it in different ways, finding ways to get value out of it. I myself have probably overlooked this quite considerably because I'm very sensitive to smells. And so I generally stay away from anything that's fragrant, right? Like I just
Mhm.
don't have fragrances around. I don't have candles. Like I just don't enjoy it for the most part. But um, that tells me that like perhaps a more acute awareness of your own smell is something that's underdeveloped in our culture, right?
Definitely.
If
And
you think of
it's
ancient
like,
cultures, they would have had more uh, a more broad like palette or more a developed palate for the distinctions between smells, especially in nature.
Yeah, some say that Paris today, retains some of this ability, um, due to their hygiene particularities. Um, yeah, I mean it's like what if who you are is in no small part a biofeedback loop? Like it's totally possible. So in the future, the extreme end of like, pheromonal stuff is like maybe we help you modulate your microbiome. So you're actually the biome is actually producing these compounds, and
Mm,
this improves your sense of confidence or reduces some anxiety, or helps you in some way. And again, I think those it's hard to even imagine how many facets of your personality might be the product of how you or your environment smells. And like you said, I don't have candles. I don't do these things because they do affect me to a degree that I've experienced as a negative valence. Um, but that means that there's also got to be some positive kind of like other side of that coin that I think we're totally overlooking. So the dark path is like synthetic fragrances. It's overuse. It's like yeah, just a lack of like biocompatibilism, I think.
mm,
Mm. So I remain pretty hopeful. The research is tough to do because one, scientists don't take any of this very seriously at all. And I'm like, what do you do with that? The shift in that direction recently came from a study in newborns. And so
mm,
what we say like putative human pheromones, um, there was a study done, and I think I mentioned this to you another time as well. They pumped a smell into a room, a dark room, nobody else is in it except a newborn or neonate or infant. Um, and it started to suckle automatically without the presence of the mother around. So we found a pheromone which induces a clear, like almost always induces a suckling behavior in a human. This has never been done before. I mean, we don't think about ourselves as having those kinds of like stimulus outcome instincts. And they found one, and it's in infants, and it helps them latch on to the nipple, the areola, the nipple, whatever, for suckling. And there's also these African tribes who have been doing this, it's like a little scissoring motion on the areola that we think now actually improved their latching rate. And midwives use this technique all the time now. Um, and it improves their latching rate because it's stimulating those scent glands around the areola. So
mm,
even if the baby can't like see or really cognize it, there is this scent link. Um, and our body is full of these like chemoreceptors. They're obviously on our tongue. They're in our intestines. They're in tissues that you would never imagine. So I think even going broader than just scent, it's like chemoreception appears to be like a very blue space or blue, what do they call it? A field in the future. Not gonna do the term.
So you said you've been working on this on and off for about 10 years with a number of other individuals.
Mhm.
Um, is the goal to kind of just continue to do research on this? Are you forming a company out of this? Are you going to look
Mhm.
to productize this? You mentioned the regulatory hurdles that are
Yeah.
probably, you know, you probably aren't ready to get mixed up with the FDA quite yet.
No, I'm gonna wait until after inauguration day, I think.
Yeah, right, right.
Yeah, RFK seems like a pro pheromone guy to me. Yeah, I think we'll end up productizing it. I've got some things that we had two periods of sale before in 2012 when I was in at college in East Michigan, and that was when we were like, okay, what do we need? Do we need an Adderall alternative? So that kind of drove a lot of our design. Then is just the users that we were around. Um, but today I've gotten a lot more good feedback out of the social anxiety product. I think we'll call that. Haven't decided yet. Actually, I'll keep that one in my pocket.
Mm,
But so I think my guess is within the next 6 months, these will be available. Initially, they'll be probably pretty high priced because I expect it'll be the kind of like the biohackers in yours and mine spaces that will be most interested in giving this a test. And I really want people who kind of have the wherewithal and value the opportunity here because they're going to give me the best feedback, I think. So we're kind of like filtering for a particular kind of nerd in the first two. And I look forward to seeing what kind of community and what kind of like cross-talk happens. I mean, the repeat scene is like so experimental. The biohacking scene is praise be to Gwern. I feel like he probably has set me on more of my paths than many others. And so I used to hang around like the subreddit for nootropics, and now I think it's kind of in ruins. But that's really what I'm hoping to get out of it initially is like that initial sense of experimental community where people are trying the different compounds. We're not going to stop at blends. The
Mm.
idea is to produce like a high quality version of individual molecules so you can really fuck around and see what works for you. Um, yeah. And thankfully these things are not like I don't need a factory to build these. It's
Yeah,
actually quite a low tech solution.
I was going to ask. So when you're talking about blends or compounds, are these literally just mixtures of otherwise isolated compounds? The other thing I would be so there's like very little actual like chemistry happening. Uh,
Other than just like in the preparation of fragrances and solvents and solutes and making sure that nothing's going to oxidize or interact over time. No, it's pretty basic. It's basically just what a nose that a fragrance company might be doing.
okay, cool,
Hmm.
cool.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so I want to talk a little bit about kind of like the whole Peating sphere, uh, maybe what might be broadly referred to as like bioenergetics. You know,
Hmm.
I'm admittedly like not much of a peater. Most of the
Hmm.
peat stuff that I've consumed has been very passively through the online subcultures that I interface with. Um, but from afar, it's interesting. And I like the idea of the ideas, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Um,
I go ahead. Sorry.
well, no. So I'd love to get the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about what's happening in that space and sort of where you think see things going, and also maybe a little bit about how you've implemented some of that stuff in your own life. Because, you
Hmm.
know, I mean, health, longevity, like I'm over 30 now, so I'm starting to think about these things, realizing that
Hmm.
I'm not going to live forever. And I would say that I'm probably fairly healthy compared to most. Um, that being said, I'm always trying to optimize my brain. I'm always trying to feel like I have more energy, more time, better
Hmm.
focus. These are things that I really care about at this stage. So, um, I'd love to learn like where you're at with that. I mean, you said that you've been reading, people like Wern for a long time, and that the scene is sort of shifted. Perhaps I'd be also be wondering like where the online ecology for that kind of a conversation is happening. Is it all happening on X?
So yeah, there is a forum. It just got bought, and I think it's like low toxicity lifestyle is the name of it now. And they like totally did a name change as well. And I actually haven't looked into it in a bit. And typically now, if I like need like kind of like repeat style stuff, I hop onto the AI tool Perplexity or just like use kind of like a targeted search towards the forum
Hmm.
or on Reddit, which is not great, but there is a community there. But I think a lot of it is happening on X. At least for kind of like secondary commentary, if not the primary kind of findings, when people are saying, "Oh, I did this," and so then that. Um, it's it kind of reminds you of like Chinese medicine in that like all of it seems interesting, and then probably half of it is useful, and the other half is also not useful. So I think the things that I take away are pretty kind of like 80-20 rule. Carbs not bad. Like energy when energy demands are high, good. I have my own little shtick that I like to do about how it's really like the core of Pete's theory, which he describes as like how energy and structure are deeply kind of like the same thing. And I think this is reflected in other aspects of physics. If you're familiar with constructal theory, with the constructal law that flows through structures, optimize for efficiencies in those structures.
Hmm.
So my kind of like quick and charitable take on Pete is like good, high energy in, high energy out, both good. It's funny though, because he actually doesn't recommend a lot of exercise. He's kind of like, you should just be producing your high energy, your energy uh, burn through kind of like chemical and biological processes outside of the biomechanical. And so I'm not a big fan of that. I think obviously exercise good. Um,
What is
Lift
his
heavy rock.
what is his reservation about exercise?
I
Is it
think that
just
he
that
just sees it as
stresses
kind of
you
like
or
yeah, he's not into the stressful stuff, but it's like it's an acute stressor, and those seem to be really good homeostatically. Like we
right?
build up these responses, and that seems great for a variety of things, including improving your basal metabolic rate. I mean, nothing is better than just having a lot of muscle that takes a lot of calories to maintain, and using it now and then. So I think yeah, his main thing was like he didn't like the cortisol. He also maybe didn't see it as like kind of a traditional part, and someone can correct me if this is wrong, but a traditional part of kind of like human life. I wonder, had anybody asked about kind of like CrossFit or some of the more like, what about working out in your day job and not like running or lifting kind of at the gym and these like more synthetic experiences? But I haven't seen any commentary on that. He's got a couple of other things that I find kind of quirky. I think a lot of people talk about seed oils as kind of like one of his babies, um, at least in terms of the brand of Peating that we know. Um, but not all of them appear to be as bad as we think, and some of them appear maybe worse than we think. I think avocado seems to be like in the middle where there is a PUFA content, but we don't see a lot of the negative health effects. And I don't know why that is. At least in the ingesters, and maybe it's that it's rancidity. It's my personal take that might cause some of the problems with PUFAs. And the reason I think that PUFA being polyunsaturated fatty acid is that, and this has also been debunked, the blue zones, all these like areas of the world where you see supposedly high supercentenarian people living there. Um, and they eat a ton of fish. They eat a ton of fresh fish. They've got omega-3s out the wazoo. And so this kind of spurred all the American omega-3 market. What they didn't know was that the fish oil was rancid. It was oxidized in the processing. It's probably worse for you than had you just not taken anything at all, unless you're getting like pharmaceutical grade or something. Um,
Yeah, and they
so
lie
how do we
about all the birth
reconcile?
certificates.
Yeah, yeah, for tax purposes. Yeah, 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 the big scam. But it still seems like those places, regardless of whether they live that long, have a very good health span.
Mm.
So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater on that stuff. And so I reconcile this by saying, okay, they are getting a lot of omega-3s, polyunsaturated fatty acids, but they're very fresh. And if they're not fresh, they're typically smoked or canned or tinned or whatever. So I think, the best way to kind of test this in your own life is to try tinned fish. If you're not on a coast of like a beautiful Norwegian village or in the Mediterranean. So that kind of sums up my like three big ideas about repeat that I'm sure you could go a lot deeper. You can get into like all these crazy compounds, cyperheptadine, and the rest, which I'm not super experimented with. Having been on and off metabolic, I'll call them enhancers for about 10 years and recently coming off, like keep it simple, stupid, especially as you're transitioning from 20, into your 30s, where some of these things have real costs, I think is the best advice that I could take myself. Um, as somebody who has a natural inclination towards biohacking and is interested in so many of these things, it's like, yeah, maybe just try to find the top three that aren't so outlandish and let people who are younger than you, who have been able to recover more than you, test those on themselves. So that's kind of what I think about him. And actually, my admission is I have yet to read any of Ray Peat's books. I, like you, have absorbed it all through kind of social media osmotics and in
Mm.
the community, which is one thing that I actually liked about the old Reddit scene and what I like about Twitter today is for me, it just feels like a mode of learning that is a lot more humane than like necessarily the book, which I think has its place.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with that. Whenever I want to go deep on a subject, I have to get a book, but because you just need the elongated, structured content will that will give you a structure to install into your brain rather than just a bunch of selected facts that are picked here and there.
Mhm.
That's very helpful for understanding anything deeply. So, what is the core idea of bioenergetics? Just optimizing the energy flow in a system, in a biological
Yeah.
system.
Yeah. It's like energy first, like energy flows is like the form of medicine where it's like if the structure of the tissue is not optimal, how do we alter the flows to encourage new structures to form?
Hmm. And
And
that
I
looks
think, I
like
mean, like,
cell turnover, mitochondria,
mhm.
refreshment, things like that.
Yeah, 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 basically. And then, yeah, I think that about sums it up.
Awesome, awesome. All right, so I guess we touched on bioenergetics. We touched
Mhm.
on your work with olfactory science and autotherapeutics. What else uh, have you been thinking about?
Yeah, well, actually, since we're on repeat, one of the things that, and this we'll come back to this probably later on, but like the kind of the phenomena, and I'm gonna use the term lightly, of orthorexia,
Hmm.
where it's kind of like it's in the some kind of categories like anorexia and bulimia,
It's
whatever
like
the
a
most.
healthy food neurosis.
Yeah. Yeah, and I kind of think a lot of that one of the reasons that Ray Peat does so well and why he can onboard women so well to the kind of the school of thought is this orthorexic inclination. And so a lot of people say, no, this is really bad. You know, why would you encourage this? But I'm like, how do we make use of this instead of this utilization? Giving people like small, accessible experiments, like a carrot salad in the morning, doing a shot of apple cider vinegar, increasing your honey. These are like you're not like, yeah, on the deep end, you're like, take three things of aspirin and four of cyproheptadine. You know, you can go really deep with it, but the fact that it's so accessible and lets people run little tests on themselves, and particularly tests that become rituals,
Mm.
I think is maybe the most useful part of the school of thought outside of its literal, you know, biochemical effects. Um, and so this is what I've been thinking about broader is like, where are we lacking in rituals? When things work, what aspects of them are ritualistic? How do we use them to move? We talked about this recently too, but like from the profane into the sacred, and what things maybe historically have had the forces of change that they do because of belief, expectation, and state management abilities. Hacking state. Um,
Mm.
and so I think it's like, what is the carrot salad in this view? It's like an investment into oneself in which you believe and expect that it will have good physical outcomes for yourself. I think people seriously underestimate the power of that little action of deeply expecting this to work and why people attach so deeply to gurus or people who can give them that sense that, oh, if only I do this, then this will follow. There was a post yesterday, I forget the account, about a young woman in the maybe she's in the 30s, 40s, 50s, somewhere in there. And she had a program called the Claim It and Name It and Claim It was her system. And so she was shown to win like 1,000 contests, like slogan submission contests. And she said she wrote a book on this, same name, I think, where she would sit down, she would say, okay, you know, it was kind of manifesting.
Mm.
I want to win this thing. Here's how I want it to look. And she would really put it
You'd
in her mind.
visualize it.
And
Yeah.
yeah, it's like deep visualization.
Mm.
And I think she probably did this before she submitted her slogans and they won. Is it because she was calling out to the universe? Perhaps. You know, that'd be incredible. But is it more likely that she was managing her own state and accessing a billion subconscious resources with confidence? I think that's certainly true. So one thing I really like about any of the kind of ritualized and social activities that people are doing online, whether it's fragrances, whether it's carrot salad, is these rituals of personal state management. And we could go a long way with this both in terms of the ones that we test and provide kind of like scientific backing to. Yeah, I think the carrot salad probably does improve, you know, your fiber and is good for your microbes. Um, but it's also the personal. I mean, when you get on the conversation here, do you have something that I'm going to do a little swap here? But do you have something
Mm.
that you do to like hype yourself up or get in the zone?
Um, no.
Mhm.
I used to, but
You don't need
I
it anymore.
well, no, it's that I wanted to, well, for pragmatic reasons, I had to be able to start a podcast on a moment's notice,
Yeah,
with very little prep. And I would actually like to eventually get to a place where I could do it with almost no equipment.
definitely.
The one thing that is sort of like a hang up for me, as a set and setting is that I do have to be like in my space and I do have to have my setup. And
Yeah,
it looks very differently. I've done a couple other interviews that were like not set up like this, and it it changes it. But yeah,
mhm,
my attitude, and I think about this in my other work too, is like I want to be so almost nomadic where I'm ready to do the work wherever I am, basically.
mhm,
Um, but yeah, I used to be more precious about it when I was younger. Like I would give myself like a prep period, and I would have to have my notes ready, and there would be things I would need to do before. And
mhm.
um, I would say that it's it's useful for ingraining that as a habit and as a mode of faculty. But I think the goal, and this is true even if you look at like the study of like deep work, the goal should be that like you are able to click into it on a moment's notice, and then you're there, and then you're
Yeah.
only there. Like you're not anywhere else. You're not like in the temporal space of the interview. I'm only here. There's nothing
Mhm.
else before or after until it's over.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like you've like internalized whatever that state transition
Well, you
is
need to,
today.
you need to. So this is like inside baseball, at least on my perspective on being a host, is like uh you're managing like many different things all at once. You're trying to
Mhm.
manage the conversation with the guest. You're trying to uh there's a thumbs down on your screen for some reason. You're
Oh,
trying to
sorry.
manage, it's okay. I think it was an accident. You're trying to manage the conversation with the guests. You're trying to manage your own thought process. You're also trying to listen so that your response is most congruent with the flow of the conversation and what the guest is
Mhm.
saying. But uh, there are also overarching goals that you have for the flow of the discussion, the points that you want to hit. You're monitoring, there's part of you that's monitoring how the audience is going to perceive all of that. And
Mhm.
so, in order to actually have a good discussion and manage all those resources, you don't have any other bandwidth to be anywhere else. Like you have to be here. Um,
Yeah.
and probably I should actually be even less self-conscious than I am about what about how everything is going, and that would probably actually even improve the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. The flow state. That's the other thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately is these kinds of I don't know, like colloquially we call them like trances, right? Um, so hypnosis as a state management tool, things that we
Mhm.
both do ourselves and to others if you're like seeing a practitioner or an operator. Um, and I think a lot of like athletes are the prime case. The you know the pianists who, as he plays or she, the time slows. And, you know you've got all that time in the world to hit the ball or whatever. These are the kinds of things that I think are super interesting for human performance hacking state. So I'm always curious to hear what people are yeah what are doing for themselves or what they've internalized or not. Um, and I spoke with somebody, you know, yesterday who was kind of saying like, "Hey, I'm going through a kind of grief process. Do you have any recommendations?" And I said, "Well, you know, have you thought about just sitting down and ruminating about it for the next, you know, 2 weeks?"
Mhm.
She said, "Yeah, I did. I don't think I want to do this." I was like, "That's great. What about acknowledging that throughout human history, a lot of grief was processed through physical action and physical ordeal, whether it's the pallbearers carrying the, you know, the coffin on their backs, the priest swinging the censer, the walking to certain places, whether that's a place of worship or the place where they're entombed. There's actually, I think we talk about ritual a lot, and I talk about ritual probably even more, but particularly the physicality of a lot of movement, I think is super underlooked. And I think it's why athletes have such easy access to it. It's not that it's like kind of unique to them. It's just they just happen to be doing the thing which most easily produces a lot of this. And when we were talking about your experience on the pod, well, you're tracking a lot of things. That kind of like overload, a lot of people think, oh, if I just need to focus really well on like one thing. And I'm like, actually, what you need is to be like have be juggling like 12 balls and then it would click into place for you potentially if you're that type of person.
Yeah,
um
you can get it through pressure.
yeah.
But it's uncomfortable, but it is sort of the necessary if you're going to compete or do any or try to do anything at like the highest level of performance. You
Mhm.
have to learn how to block out noise. This is
Yeah.
something that I learned from a book called The Art of Learning, which is a very trite title, but
Yeah, on the
it's
nose.
it's written by this young chess prodigy. He was the subject of a film called Searching for Bobby Fischer,
Mhm.
which was I think produced in the 90s. Anyway, he was like this young chess prodigy, world champion, and then he went on to do the same thing in the martial component of Tai Chi, also reached championship level. And so he wrote a book sort of about his approach to mastery and to high level performance. And a big theme in that book was under the most stressful circumstances, like you're in the middle of a martial arts fight and your hand gets broken and you have to continue the fight. Like how to drown out all of the distraction
Mhm.
and just stay hyper locked into the goal. That's a big point. And the other thing I was going to say when you were talking about your friend going through the grief process was um, drowning out noise. And I don't think that like I think in a personal way, if you're just in your daily life, if you can find ways to just cut out the noise around you, I think that's extremely helpful. I've
Mhm.
been trying to get more into nature lately. I took a very long walk last weekend because like I'm here, I'm living in the city, and you're inundated with noise all the time. Even if you're not online all day and you successfully unplug, which I don't do as much as I would like. Um, you're constantly bombarded with all this frenetic energy from around you, from humanity, and I found that uh, in me at least a deep desire to get to a kind of quiet. And I think, of course, like there are practices you can do, meditation, for example, where you can work on harnessing that internally, even if your outside circumstances are chaotic. But I also think it's worth taking a look at like what you could do mentally, psychologically, in terms of your cognitive faculties, any creative work, if you actually went and isolated yourself a little bit from all this bombardment.
Mhm. Yeah, Justin Murphy, I think, had a shtick for a bit where he was like, "You got to go outside of the town, not like 50 minutes. You got to go like 40 minutes. You got to go away from the EMF. You got to, you really got
Yeah.
to go out there, and then spend 2 weeks like Frida Kahlo it and see what comes out of you." And I think there probably is something true to that. I'm always curious. In the time of Tesla, when electromagnetism, whatever was kind of discovered, everyone was like, "Oh my gosh, this is going to have incredible implications for the human body. This changes everything." And then it was kind of like all like, well, don't look at that. Oh, by the way, here's 5G. Like so the original like knew that this was going to do something to us, and we continue to use it. MRIs, whatever it is. But there's not, I think, as much appreciation for the bioenergetics, the biomagnetic nature of living things, as there was probably when it was discovered. Um, and my roommate, who I live with currently here in Austin, he used to go down to the pool and would meditate there, but it was like noisy. It'd be like partying, with DJs, and so he said, no, it's a whole nother game. And I was like, oh, that sounds really unpleasant to me, but I'm glad that it works for you. That level of, and this is the theme that I've been working with, idealization versus utilization. Um, of his level of utilization, I think was really interesting. And to kind of test it out myself, so I've been practicing hypnotism, which has been very interesting, and I've got about 5 or 6 friends that I've very solidly hypnotized. Um, and one of the cases, we were just having a drink downtown, and he's like, "Well, can you do it now?" And I was like, "Well, it's there's like construction across the street, there's cars going by, and this is a main street." And he was like, "But yeah, I think so." And so, for example, going back to the overload thing, that's exactly what we did. I'm like, okay, and now you're listening to the sounds of the jackhammer and hearing every car and every person walking by. And you
Oh,
keep
so
kind of doing this loop
you
where
entrance
you
them into
just,
the environment. Oh, that's interesting.
yeah, yeah, using the noise. And if you can do it to somebody else, you can do it to yourself. It's probably easier if somebody else does it for you and kind of orchestrates your attention briefly. But a lot of people have said, yeah, it's at least a very good tool for rapidly getting into a kind of meditative state at first. But even just kind of demonstrating to yourself that you can go to somewhere of intense focus and almost, pure noise filtration in the midst of all of that sound,
Mm.
that opens new doors for you cognitively. That changes your beliefs. Okay, I don't need calm to go become the focused me that I need right now. I can do it anytime. So I think a lot of the therapeutic benefits of hypnosis come from exactly this kind of phenomena to belief interaction, this psychodynamic loop, um, where as soon as you experience something outside of the frame of what you thought was possible, that has implications in your system. And so that's very fun and very interesting to see kind of play out.
Yeah, so I want to talk to you a little bit about kind of I apologize, I was searching for
Oh, good.
something. Uh your interest in sort of hypnosis and
Hmm.
it's where it's sort of at in today's world. Many people still think of it as sort of like a pseudoscientific thing, but obviously, like anyone who takes even a cursory glance at the history of it will see that it's been in use. It's still in use in lots of particular cases. For example, in childbirth, uh, as a sort of uh, I guess I don't know if it's considered would be considered an anesthetic, maybe an amnesiac. Uh,
Oh, both. Yeah.
yeah, but yes, I wrote an article a few years back, I guess one a year and a half ago now, called Gradients of Persuasion.
Mm.
And the subtitle of this article is, and it's up on my Substack if people want to go read it. It's called On Methods of Immersion and Captivation, where the I tried to describe persuasion as a gradient that starts from simple suggestion. And by that I don't mean like in a hypnotic sense. I mean it like literally like evolutionarily like someone's dimples making you like them more, right? Very, very simple things. The quality of their skin showing you health and vitality, and therefore making you more likely to want to be near them as opposed to far away from someone that has very bad skin. Uh, these are in this essay, and it wasn't a fully formed idea. I'm not an expert on this, but in this essay, it was like these are all very subtle gradients that start from these minute, like hardly perceptible in some cases, evolutionary markers, and
Hmm.
then broaden out with like human language and then media and so forth into sales, marketing, all the way up to hypnosis and then various kinds of what you would call mind control. Um, and so anyway, this has been a topic that's sort of been with Hacking State from the beginning and has been a one of my minor interests for quite a while. But I'm curious, like, what sparked your interest in this, and what have you learned about it so far?
Yeah. What sparked? Well, I guess when I was younger, I had an interest, but I was like, yeah, that's not real. So,
Okay, yeah,
that's cool. I put my Harry Potter book down and kind of like
yeah.
walked away.
Is it
Um,
because you're evil? Is it because you just want to control people?
yeah.
Yeah,
Um, I wish. I think if I had less scruples, uh, my life would be a lot easier. So I probably would have done the ICO thing years ago. But unfortunately, it's like I'm not so interested in controlling people. I'm much more interested in like seeing what they do. I think is much more of my like innate drive for hypnosis. And so when people ask me like, "Hey, how can I do this?" I'm like very problem solving about it. That's
yeah.
my love language. Um,
We're
and
just
and so
trying to
seeing
hack.
where
We're
they
just trying
go.
to hack your state. Like we're just trying to figure out
Yeah.
if there's a
Yeah.
trick.
Have you heard about our Lord and State here? Sorry, dumb joke. Um, so I met a guy at Pershing, which is a club in the East Side recently. Coincidentally, it's where Elon Musk was meeting with his colleagues and decided to buy Twitter, a piece of history. And he had said that he had just left with the CAA and was had moved from Virginia to Austin and had a small hypnosis practice. And I said, like, really? What? And I'm like, oh yeah, the CIA, you guys do this all the time. Like it's funny that simultaneously I had this like isolated belief that MK Ultra was real, but I
Mm,
did not think that hypnosis was a serious, tool, path, profession, whatever it was. And so that quickly kind of dissolved, that contradiction resolved. And I did some research and I was like, oh yeah, this is totally real. Um, we've been using it for over 100 years for surgery.
yeah.
The S-dye state is what it was called, back then. This is
Goes
like
back to the Civil War battlefields.
yeah, yeah. I mean, this was like James Esta, I think was his name. He was in India. He was kind of like left the European medical system because he was trying to explore this stuff, and they were like, "Yeah, this is not real. You need to get the heck out of here." So he did it in India, and like over thousands and thousands of patients and patients. And yeah, now we use it for. surgeries where maybe pain control medication isn't appropriate. And that you can be basically totally awake during the entire process. And they can be doing deep organ stuff. Partially, this is because there's actually not a ton of, pain receptors once you get past, I guess, the first couple layers or whatever. But also just calming that discomfort is really helpful. And you mentioned earlier whether it's an amnesiac or kind of an analgesia. And the answer is it depends on what kind of sentences you use and what functions of the brain, what parts of the brain you target, whether those are kind of like more like lower pain perception or more sense making, where okay, maybe there's pain, but you can experience it as discomfort, or maybe something else. Our ability to assign something to that signal rather than modifying the signal itself. And so this is like the top kind of like medical hypnotists who are doing this in surgeons today will use both kinds. They'll use the underlying signal to suppress or modify, and then they'll also use sentences which help you recontextualize or cognitively restructure the signal that you are getting if you do notice it, which is
Hmm.
very cool. Yeah, hypnobirths, that's massive. That was the thing that's been going on with like my female friends, and I didn't even know it until I started asking around. And several have said, "Oh yeah, all of my births have been with a hypnotherapy, enabled midwife or whatever it was." And I was like, "This is crazy. Like nobody knows." The third kind of thing, which I think we've kind of known about, is the proliferation of autogynephilic persuasive pornography, AGPP, or AKA like sissy hypnoporn. And so that was maybe I would say the third thing that was happening in environment where I was like, what's going on with this? This appears to be having a growing effect in social media and stuff. It's popping up on gay. So it maybe pops up more often in my lens of the internet than not that I'm out here like looking for stuff because I try not to I don't approve of pornography in any public channel that I will ever speak on. But I would say it's something that it became very clear to me that we needed to start paying attention to hypnosis, to be clear, because it was having outside effects in a variety of different fields, and nobody even was taking it seriously. So step one for me was to understand whether it was real. Step two was to understand how it operated, of which we don't have a good model for yet. There are several theories, the top of which is basically uh, an expectancy model.
Hmm.
This is happening because you can generate such a strong expectancy in them. Um, and then the third way is like, oh, okay, now that you know kind of that it is working, what is it useful for? And to that end, I applied to grad schools this week for counseling, master's in counseling, to go to grad school for that because I think this is going to be something that is going to be very, very helpful going forward. And about 20% of people are very susceptible to hypnosis. When I say very susceptible, I mean that you can basically ask them to enter a trance and they say, okay, and they do it and they go right in.
Like that level of suggestibility.
That easy.
So I
And
want to
say,
talk
can you?
to, I guess I want to slow it down for a second. Um, I want to talk about induction, the induction process. So
Mhm,
for those who, even if you have like a basic, like I went through a phase where I was watching a bunch of like public hypnotist performers on YouTube, try like just watching them like hypnotize like high schoolers or whatever, right? Like crowds
mhm,
and ran it or people in public. And and one of the first things you learn about is like, okay, there's this like induction process, and some people are more susceptible than others. The my understand like usually the term would be like suggestibility, right?
mhm,
Um, and what's interesting about this propensity to be hypnotized is that um, it's not the cognitive profile that you would assume, right?
mhm,
As in maybe someone thinks like, oh, well, I'm very smart, so therefore it wouldn't happen, right? Or maybe someone is, very disagreeable, and so that wouldn't work either. But I want to ask you a little bit about like what is the two things. One, what are the markers for like high suggestibility? And for those listening, like only use these for good, not evil.
yeah.
But also, uh, the induction, like you said a minute ago that like it depends, the effect that you have depends partially on the series of words that you speak. And
Mhm.
and my question on that is like, Is the induction only mediated through language? My understanding is that there could also be completely non-linguistic inductions as well.
Yeah, I guess when I talked about like what areas of the brain you're addressing using words, that's the simplest way to do it. We've evolved for language and it maps to a lot of interesting things. But really, I guess if I had to generalize it, it'd be like, what internal functions are you evoking through some stimulus? So, Milton Erickson, this is the kind of the founder of some modern psychotherapy and probably the top kind of like renowned hypnotist in the world. Lived in Arizona in the 50s and 60s and did a lot of interesting work. He People claim that he could like tap on a table and they would just go under. Is it really that because he was tapping on a table? Probably helped a little bit, but more likely it was that his expertise and renown were doing the work for him just by being in his presence. Everyone knew that he was an expert and was this masterful trance creator. The guy could just breathe. And by virtue of that, people would say, "Oh, he's doing it to me." And people refused to meet with him. It was that strong. But was he doing anything? No, just his reputation probably preceded him in a very
Shows that
serious
they
way.
had a belief installed.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Whether they'd never met him before, or maybe they met him and said, I can't be around that man anymore. He's doing something to me." They expected themselves to enter a trance in his company, so they often would. A good example of this is he would sit at a chair and he'd ask somebody to come up who said they couldn't be hypnotized. Well, like, not me. I'm too smart. I'm too aware. I'm too whatever it is. You'll never get inside my head. And so he's like an old man. He's very disarming at this point. He's often in a wheelchair due to polio, like double polio or something. It was crazy. And he would basically look at this guy and he's like, well, something has to happen. You're up on stage. And the social pressure and the sudden kind of context of that interaction, even the guy who said it wouldn't happen, something had to happen, and that was the easiest thing that could occur. So he was really just, I would say, an expert of our understanding peer pressure and expectancy and how belief operates in people. And once you nail those things, I mean, you could tap on a table, you could use music, you can use visual images, propaganda, probably really good at this when movies and music videos and such, like when they choose to create a cut in the series of images, naturally tends to align with you when you want to make a blink. So there's all these tiny optimizations which make it very easy to just interpret and to have an internal representation, which is why books I think are so good for uh, religions and spirituality. You get a very long piece of text and you kind of experience the words automatically in your mind. You're not choosing to say, well, I really want to understand it. And some people do. You do a deep reading or whatever. This sentence or that sentence, typically the meaning just arises automatically. So that's the kind of thing that a lot of hypnosis practitioners or media designers are attempting to do is to evoke an experience. And if I can, I'd like to go back to what you had said earlier about the kind of gradations of persuasion, because that's something that I've written about a little bit too, from simple claims to like NLP and brainwashing, and how we avoid kind of getting trapped in that compelling voice. And so the early hypnotists, they would use kind of the classics of okay, look up here, look at a light, look at the watch. Now you're getting very sleepy. You're going to do this, and now this is going to happen. And some people that works because they're just, again, 20% are very susceptible. But a lot of people, especially those who are maybe initially kind of like not resistant to experiencing that state, um, they prefer more impressionistic language. So instead of you're going to fall, into a deep sleep, you might say, well, you can experience something that might feel more comfortable for you. And the difference between that is you can't argue with me. I haven't forced you to feel anything,
Yeah,
but I have
yeah.
centered your attention around a question.
Well, it is. There's a very subtle nuance there, which is that in one form you have this sort of declarative, almost authoritarian
Mhm.
framing, right? Where some people will just fall into that and or they're not going to put up much of a resistance and then that sort of lets them dive in. Whereas in the more adversarial types, what's interesting is you actually have almost the creation of a vacuum where they're expecting something to push against. And so
Hmm.
when you get rid of the thing that they're supposed to push against, there's now a vacuum there, and then they dive
Yep.
in. And so
Yeah.
that's sort of like the chi of dealing with those two broad personality types.
Yeah. The second type falls under a category called like the confusion techniques. Um, and so you kind of nailed it. It's like that's exactly not even just you can do this physically or you can do it metaphorically, where every I'll give a quick example of what a slight confusion moment might be. But after everything we said about hypnosis, what's right, there's nothing left. It's a series of words, you know all the meanings, you have no idea, and you're just like, wait, and you kind of you get a brief moment where you're not sure what happened.
Yeah.
Um, and so the physical form of that, and your gestures nailed it. It's called the hand fall technique. And you say, okay, now press on my hand, press, and you build up this tension, and then you drop the hand away, and the brain goes, whoa, as their balance center kicks in, and they need to correct themselves. And in that split moment, you have the defenses come down. The critical faculties are no longer as active as the limbic system just tries to figure out what's going on, and you can deliver a suggestion, which is sleep and stand, or whatever it is you want to do. And it's still having seen this, it's like I still struggle to like deeply accept that I live in a universe where this is possible. There was a long-standing model where I was like, wow, humans, we're not like this. What are the implications for democracy? What are the implications for social structure? How do I reimagine religion? What does speaking tongues mean in charismatic churches? How do rituals operate? It really caused me to do a reassessment of a lot of our institutions. And I'm curious to think about, to ask you kind of where you think that fact sits in what a democracy is, or how government and how consent operates. And
Yeah, I mean, I've also written a good bit about propaganda as such, and one of the things that people don't um, think about very often is that from the very beginning of kind of the advent of really the advent of radio, but especially television, these sort of one-to-many broadcast mediums, you had the prominent thinkers of the day talking about using these technologies in order to affect public opinion, right? If
Mhm,
you go back to like Edward Bernays and even before him, Walter Lippmann, the early 20th century intellectuals that were thinking about democracy were thinking about using uh, using technology to alter public opinion. And in some way, the mass democracy is not really possible without this kind of coordination mechanism.
mhm,
And that's really what it is. So you have, you know, you have, of course, the use of of German propaganda in the Third Reich, and you have the use of Soviet propaganda in the Soviet Union. But kind of the part of this history that gets lost is that there was also the same exact thing happening in all of the mass democracies, right? In the UK and in America and in France,
mhm,
especially around the first and it sort of reached its peak, I would say, it at the during the Second World War, um, where you had governments highly invested in understanding how to use propaganda to manipulate the opinion of their populations. And then, of course, you have Edward Bernays following the war going into industry and deciding to invent the field of advertising in order to teach companies how to do the same thing. And this is sort of like the hangover of the sort of post-war period of the United States is that essentially like all of the household names and businesses that are 20th century mainstays of industry and consumer goods were
mhm.
utilizing these techniques and in many cases even outright consulting with the father of propaganda, Edward Bernays.
Mhm. So if I kind of hear your argument correctly, it's like it's actually always been kind of endemic feature of a well-functioning.
Well, I don't know always, but at least from the when you need to start coordinating millions and millions or tens of millions of people,
Mhm.
it starts to become very difficult to do that if you're trying to do
Yeah.
that in a particular way. And I would just say that like the the whole idea of like catalyzing demand, right? Demand for something that does not otherwise exist, right? Like what is the base demand for goldfish? And I don't mean like the actual fish, I mean like the crackers, right? Like how
Oh,
many
okay.
people actually need to buy a goldfish? The answer is no one needs to buy goldfish, right?
Mhm.
But you you can start to generate demand for these kinds of products. And much of like the poison in our industrial food supply and other things like that are all around designing ways to sustain demand for things that are ultimately unnecessary. And I'm not even going on like an anti-capitalist, uh materialist rant. I think that capitalism is fine and it's good that we can afford to have more things than we ever have in human history. But
Mhm.
uh I would just say that like people shouldn't take it for granted that a lot of effort and thought and resources have been poured into getting them to do things they wouldn't otherwise do.
Mhm. Yeah. And what if we could use these powers for good?
Exactly. So I want to
Yeah.
ask you, like, what are some thoughts you have around actually utilizing hypno? I mean, I know that there are independent hypnotist practitioners who try to help people with like smoking cessation or addictions or trauma or whatever else.
Mhm.
But what are your thoughts? I mean, you said you're literally going to start a master's program.
Yeah. So I think that one of the impetuses for the master's program is you're not in many states you're not allowed to say you do hypnotherapy unless you also have the therapist licensure. So I think that's something that I'd like to be able to say that I do. I'm not a stage hypnotist. I don't make people click like chickens. I'd like to work with them on real problems. So I think that's, in our current credentializing system, that's probably the best thing for me to do. And also I enjoy learning and I think it's going to be interesting stuff either way. Um, I'm most interested in, I would say, the shift over the past, 30, probably since the 60s in therapy to being almost utterly useless for men. Like totally, it's the industry as a whole is probably nothing else has speed run such promise to something so useless as quickly as psychotherapy has from Freud to today. And so the joke is like, oh yeah, you want me to go to therapy? I'm gonna sit in front of a, quote unquote, a liberal for 3 hours a week until I believe what you want me to. Like, that's just, it's not a good sell. But the problem with it is that that seems to be all that there is, and part of that is an incentive structure thing. They only get paid as long as you keep coming back, so they're not really incentivized to solve your problems. And a lot of things are like that, dating apps, for instance. So what does actually like a brief and solutions focused therapy look like, and how would that play out for men? And I think for those of them that are accessible to it or amenable to it, hypnosis is probably going to be the quickest way to do it. For a lot of the mainstream issues, smoking cessation, weight loss, simple behavior modification, it's like 96% cure rate over 6 sessions. Psychotherapy does not have those numbers,
That's crazy.
and it's insane. It's absolutely insane. Yeah. And so and so there's really, it's like, okay, I have this kind of like hammer and I'm like, what is a nail? I think some of the biggest stuff is like anything behavioral or habit based. I want to stop using drugs. I want to drink less. I want to sleep better. I want to feel less stressed. I want to feel more confident. The internal state stuff is really good. Um, I think sexual performance is going to be big. Like in the age of like a porn sick, manosphere, that's going to be really interesting to get them kind of weaned off of artificial super hyperstimulus or super stimulus.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm especially keen on a lot of the men's kind of like modern issues. Um, and I think there's a lot to come out of that. I'm also curious about the ability to, there is I'm like trying to phrase this nicely, but there is not an insignificant number of people who I think, by virtue of having uh, a kind of concomitant trait or disorder, including borderline, maybe autism, maybe other personality issues, um, that are very vulnerable to suggestion. And I think that there's a lot of media content producers who are currently taking advantage of that, um, to basically cause gender dysphoria in people.
Yeah, so you mentioned that previously in the discussion, the
Mhm.
autogynephile phenomenon.
Yeah.
Um, and essentially what you're making the claim that you think this is behind, and I've seen your tweets on this, that this is
Mhm.
behind a lot of the rise in transgender identification.
Yeah.
Um, and I do know that there's good evidence that autistic, young autistic people, for example, seem to be like tremendously susceptible to this. I know in particular autistic girls tend to be very susceptible to becoming FTMs.
Mhm.
Uh, but you're saying that there's also this media, there seems to be this dark underbelly of an industrial complex that's taking advantage of these techniques uh, to basically cause gender dysphoria.
Yeah, not just gender dysphoria, but like total brainwashing and also amnesia over how they ended up in that in the first place. This is not just me. It's like BuzzFeed News has covered this. This is not
Yeah.
like me with a conspiracy, fringe theory or whatever. I'm not. And to be clear, I don't want to say that I'm like invalidating the reasons, experience, whatever of all people who may have gender experiences that are outside the norm. Um, but it does seem to be that some of them are victims of kind of a brainwashing. Yeah.
Do you think it's
So
a
I'm like,
psyop? Maybe we
I
shouldn't
would not
say.
be surprised. I would
Okay.
not be surprised. Yeah. I think it's a clear avenue for social destabilization. It's working. If if so. I'm also interested in, yeah, how do we maybe help some of these people? Because it's tough to come out to your psychologist or your doctor and be like, hey, I've been watching a year's worth of hypnotic transgender content. What do I do? This is causing disruptions in my life and in my relationships. So I don't think the medical field is really well equipped to handle this right now. But if with the again a licensed practitioner and the right skills, I think we could probably do a lot of relief for people who are facing some of this stuff, especially when they may have trouble. Um, they may have cognitive limitations imposed, even voicing the concern. So, kind of awareness about the problem is really the only way I think to solve it, because otherwise they may be quote unquote brainwashed into not reaching out for help, which is
Hmm.
wild. So,
You mean it's like that thorough in terms of it's
yeah, for the
actual
for the people
brainwashing. Like it's not just
at the end of the session, the instructor can tell them, and you won't remember anything that's happened here today, but you will carry with you basically everything, every other command that is relevant. So some of these people can't
they don't even know, or like the
correct.
part of them that's you're interfacing with in normal life is not aware.
Is
But
you can see it as like
if you
compartmentalized.
were to
Yeah.
ask them, they would sincerely tell you
They would have amnesia for the experience.
that's crazy.
Yeah. Yes. So and a lot of times the only way to kind of surface that fact is to put them back into a trance state where they are in better attunement with their subconscious or unconscious, where a lot of these things are kind of stored. Um, that founder of hypnotherapy, Milton Erickson, he's like, compared to Freud, who kind of saw the subconscious as being a very dark and scary place,
Mhm.
Erickson thought that it was kind of a vast resource, far more intelligent than the kind of waking mind. Um, and I think that plays out with some of these interventions is like they're not going to remember until you kind of plug them back into the lower mind. Um, and so yeah, they can just have amnesia. Not everybody is amnesia is a hard effect to get hypnotically. It's not easy. You have to be able to kind of like get to a certain, I don't want to call it depth, but I'll call it depth. It's a construct. It's not
Mhm.
literal. Um, but for those people that are very susceptible, aka people with borderline personality disorders or the personality traits, Um, that's it's probably pretty easy. And I wanted to come back to your original question. I know I go on loops for a while. It's called the weave. Um, you just asked me what the kind of average kind of demographic or what a person looks like that's high susceptibility, and it's probably going to be the kind of like absent-minded creative who nevertheless can obtain like deep focus on their work. If they're a yuppie, they're probably in UX UI, where they have a mix of creativity and detail orientation at the same time. And that kind of maps because the state of hypnosis when we do the brain scans, fMRI, we see kind of like task orientation very active, as well as kind of like a type of relaxation. Um, and what we take away from that is the highly hypnotic person is very good at a task. And they're very good at many tasks because they can focus deeply. And the task that they're focused on in this instance is being hypnotized,
Hmm.
whatever they understand that experience to be like. So we go back to expectancy. In the time of hypnosis's kind of founding with Anton Mesmerism, when he would do it successfully, it would take a long time, it'd be like 40 minutes. People would be like laying there and be waving these iron branches over them or whatever. And they would go into fits. They'd have like seizures and stuff because that's what they expected to experience when when they would, enter the goal state. And today, people, you're asked to kind of slump over because that's what they've seen in movies and stuff. But where people think the biggest misconception about trance is that it's a state.
That is a discrete.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some like thing, a discrete thing happening in the brain, and there are some features, but it's actually more of a product of suggestion
Yeah. Well, I mean,
that is then oh,
the, the listener should contemplate what's happening when you're spending hours and hours and hours listening to someone being in your ear on a podcast, right?
definitely.
Or an audiobook or anything
Mhm.
else, right? Um, the media you're consuming is also putting you into some variation of a state, or at least
Yeah.
somewhere along that gradient. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, TV trance, huge. Highway hypnosis is another kind of daily experience that people often have. If you've
oh,
driven home and you're like, wow, I was kind of in my head that entire time. It's like, yeah, your
right.
subconscious is handling your stuff and you're just whiling away. Um, and it would be nice to be able to access those states more at will, I think. And some people can through self-hypnosis, but again, it's easier if somebody kind of gets you into it and then gives you a tool, typically a trigger, when you take 3 deep breaths and you want to enter a state of deep self-hypnosis, you can, kind of thing. But again, it's really just about proving to them that something is possible and then giving them their tools to entertain that possibility once again. So the loop is phenomena, ideas, to beliefs, and you just run that loop until you get to wherever you want to go, kind of.
Mm.
Mhm.
I'm curious about like the cognitive dissonance or lack thereof that's related to the truth value of different beliefs. Because I would imagine that what I mean by that is like I could imagine that a dissonant belief would create more uh like if you install a belief that is truth that is like low truth value, that would create more cognitive dissonance over time. But it might also be the true that you could install a belief that has high truth value and that therefore is like more congruent over time.
Mhm.
And many beliefs might also be neutral with regard to their like in that they might be what I mean by that is sort of like in the reflexivity sense, like they might be self-reinforcing based on, like it will become more of the reality the longer you believe it.
Yeah, yeah. That's a really common pattern in kind of the integrations section of a lot of hypnotic sessions, where you say like, okay, and now in the future, every time you do this and you really feel the effects that you're looking for, you're going to believe even stronger in your ability to obtain those effects next time. It's natural confidence building in the phenomena. And I think you're totally right about the incongruence and congruence. There's a debate in the hypnosis community which is like, can you be made to do things you don't want to do, or do things that are incongruent with your deeply held values and beliefs? Um, and a lot of people say, well, of course not. No, you would just bring yourself out of trance. And I think for the most part, that's probably true, but it's clearly, not the case. I mean, I've seen people walk up on the streets and they will pay in like monopoly money, and the bartender will accept it, after a brief inductive practice. And it's like clearly not in their interest to take fake money. Like maybe there's a part of them that desires to see what would happen if I accept this money, but it's like we have a lot of evidence that people will do things that they normally wouldn't do, under these effects with a skilled practitioner. Um, so I don't want to say like it's hard to like point at the exact problem that I've seen here because it appears to be kind of loop in and of itself. But it's like if you believe that hypnosis can't make you do anything you don't want to do, and you have an experience and something happens, you blame yourself. And that's the weird part. So people who believe again that you can't be made to do anything you don't want to do, anything that happens thereafter is actually has a root in your desires and
Right. You
will.
you have to now resolve that contradiction. And the way you
Yeah,
resolve it is if you hold on to the idea that you can't do something you don't want to do, is that, well, then you must have wanted to do that.
exactly. This is ground floor, I think, of a lot of the brainwashing that happens. And we see this happen with like in manipulative and emotional relationships. I think it's probably, well documented in the propagandists and stuff, but it's like, wow, you did it. And I knew that you would because you're that kind of person. So
Yes,
again, we've
exactly.
got this phenomena and we're using it to create an idea to modify a belief. And it's horrible. So I think it's actually much safer to say, yeah, you can be made to do things that you don't want to do, because that always gives you room to offload and compartmentalize some phenomena that you can reject.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the I don't know if it has a name for it, but like this is like a general trend of like the people you need to worry about are the people who tell you that they would never do such a thing or that they
Mhm.
could not possibly do such a thing. Like if you're worried about someone, stealing money from you or betraying you in some way, and they tell you, "Oh, I could just I would never be able to do that to someone. Like I would never do that." That's the someone you should watch out for. Um,
Definitely.
because the real answer and the real person who has some kind of psychological defense against, let's just say defection in general in this case, uh, is someone who says, "Oh yeah, I know I could definitely be that person, and so I'm just not going to put myself in a situation where that could happen."
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And their honesty around that is, I think, very, very, very interesting. Not without its own risks, I think. It reminds me of the phenomena where if you tell somebody this is a sales trick, for trick for anybody listening, if you tell someone, well, it's entirely your choice. You're completely free to choose either way. But I would love for you to do option A. By reaffirming their agency, you actually increase the likelihood that they're going to pick whatever it is that you want them to do. This drives me nuts.
Mhm.
Like, like
It's
what
such
are we to
a
do with
it's
that?
such a tactic,
Yeah, yeah,
and like inside of your relationships, if someone's doing that pretty consistently, like it's difficult
yeah.
because a lot of what people
Yeah.
want is the perception that they have a choice, right?
Mhm,
And that almost matters more uh, than uh, that the choice they make is the one that they would
mhm.
want.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. What are we trying to do here? The the so for instance, when people ask me, for advice sometimes, which I'm very honored, it's like kind of new in my life. I'm like, wow, happy to share some thoughts.
Well,
But I
you're
tend
now
to
becoming an
disclaim it.
el you're now becoming an elder millennial, Tom.
Yeah, yeah, it's so over. Um, but I tend to disclaim it, and first I'm like, hey, so this is just how I've approached it, and you can, I hope that it's useful to you as a tool, and if it's not useful as a tool, I hope it's at least useful like a funhouse mirror might be, and that it can tell you what you're not. And so I think like a lot of like truths can only lead you in like one direction, but falsehoods can take you in a billion. Um,
Yes.
and I like taking advantage. I mean, it's a kind of the post-rationalist thesis or whatever. Um, but I love leaving room for like fictions to be useful. Um, and so that's like one reason that one way that I respond to like, you're free to do whatever you want, kind of thing. Um, and this is a bit off topic, but I want to return to something I said earlier about how do we avoid I'm closing a loop here, um, it, the force of propaganda or some of these strong claims, and that I think it is to use impressionistic language, and it's one thing that Milton Erickson championed. The problem is that even though he was using impressionistic language, you can feel this way if you'd like to. You're free to choose whatever you'd like. He was getting higher compliance in his hypnotic sessions. So it's like our options are either I can affirm agency and cultivate agency, and people still seem to enter into greater social compliance, or I can try to be more direct and controlling, and it's like it's like where do we go from here? And maybe you're familiar with the term network spirituality.
No,
This is big in the Milady space,
I've seen it. I
Remelia.
just have no idea what it means.
Yeah, I don't know that anybody knows what it means, but
Okay.
I like have my own version of it, which is like a lot of what we do and who we are does seem to live in the network, the kind of Indra's net of all those around us. And so anytime we try to get this like kind of foolproof personal will and free will, this agency, we always find that it's running in loops between us. And even when I try to affirm the agency of others in a very discreet, very, you know, like, do you want the apple or the orange? Like,
Hmm.
you still find that you're always kind of in this intersubjective thing, which you can either be very comforted by or, very, very chilled by, perhaps. And you're free to choose either one.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting because I guess the question then becomes like we have these tools. We can choose to not use them. We can choose to not know about them, or we can choose to
Mhm.
use them and then trust ourselves that we're going to use them better than some others might. And I think
Yeah.
that's sort of that to me seems to be the overarching thesis for this direction that you're going in with regard to the problems that you've seen pop up is that you're like, well, someone's going to use these tools, and I think that I'm a good person, and so I might as well use them too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm happy to let others assess whether I'm a competent,
Yeah,
figure for that.
and you're
And right
free
now
to
it's
you're
like,
free to use them.
yeah. And this happens out in the pheromone space and some of the other things as well. It's like probably casinos, and like big brand stores are using these in their fragrance systems. So they all have discrete blends. They won't tell you about them. It's just part of their fragrances, and you're not required to because they're not regulated as drugs, But certainly some things seem to improve sales more than others. So those are actually probably the current largest users of pheromones in the Western economies today. Casinos are huge. Um, and in hypnosis, I think, yeah, we know that it's been used primarily by bad actors. It used to be bigger as a psychotherapy in the past. I'm hoping to, dig up some of its uses. Crypto, I think, is a kind of similar, which is a lot of my professional experiences in crypto, has maybe a similar way where it's like, yeah, a lot of the financial tools are being used for bad. How do we democratize? I'm very interested in any like democratizations of things that are only accessible to the wealthy. So like insurance pools and stuff.
Crypto is an interesting case too because it's also like going back to like network spirituality. Crypto is also a like belief manufacturing sector, right? Like
Yeah.
the whole way that crypto works is by manufacturing beliefs and getting consensus around those beliefs, and then
Mhm.
getting a critical mass of people to buy into the same set of beliefs.
Mhm.
Whether it's meme coins, like the whole spectrum from like literally like shitcoin meme coins down to like Bitcoin, it's
Mhm.
all a belief ecosystem.
Yeah. It's hyperstitional.
Mhm.
hmm Yeah, and I think Bitcoin obviously is such a strong mimetic lead over the rest because it has like this kind of like dead founder theory,
Yeah, but
behind it.
you have the mythos of the missing
Yeah.
founder.
Yeah. And I've watched a lot of the other projects kind of come into play I've been in it for almost a decade now, but in the beginning, there's a lot of the ICOs, which had kind of a good mix of memetics and plausible economic usefulness. And it's kind of faded away now, where I mostly see either like heavily VC, corporate backed coins. Base, maybe like Coinbase is a good example of that. Just the bigger players consolidating, or I see like Fartcoin,
Right.
or similars.
Got like
Um,
Hawk to a coin.
yeah, yeah. So there's that the middle kind of fell out, as it often does in a variety of different things. Today it seems like, and so now we have just the bimodal of like either pure mimetic speculation or very entrenched consolidated industry with the suits showing up. I'm like, I miss crypto when I would like go to a conference and like a guy in like a furry costume would come up and tell me about like zero knowledge proofs. That was like the peak crypto for me. Just felt like, wow, these guys are really doing something. Something risky. What is a Zoomer supposed to do today? I don't know. You can't even buy cigarettes at 18. It's horrible.
Yeah, well, anyway, Tom, I really appreciate you coming on and
Been a pleasure.
I'm also, kind of glad to see you returning to kind of like an interpersonal practice, I'll just say.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
Even with the pheromone stuff, even if you end up like on the manufacturing side of that, uh, it's still sort of about interpersonal dynamics. And as someone who also works in tech and is sort of like in these fields that are very abstract and very separated, like users are really just people behind screens. They're not real humans that you're interacting with uh, generally. Um, I think this is going to be part of a larger cultural trend, especially like Zoomers moving into career paths that are more focused on individual interactions, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I think we're done sort of spending all of our time in abstract symbol manipulation.
Yeah. Yeah. And thankfully, I think that the end of like the dating app traffic is starting to slow. So there's signs that, we may get out of this.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
All right, Tom, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Alex. Talk to you soon.